Hey, what's up? In this video, we're gonna take a look at how to build an admin authentication within the Edge, like in Edge functions in Vercel middleware. So originally that was possible with JSON Web Tokens. And that is kind of still possible, but in some instances, when you don't know what you're doing, you'll need to handle the JWT verification on an API route, and that's not what we want to do. We want to handle a JWT authentication in the middleware on the Edge, so it's really fast and convenient. And I say we dive right in, build some admin authentication, and let me show you exactly what I mean by that and what we're gonna build right now. Also, you'll see a proper JSON Web Token integration, including all best practices according to Vercel, because some parts of this code is taken from Vercel. So you'll learn best practices, why we're doing everything, and let's just dive right in. Okay, so here we are inside of the application, and let's talk about what we're doing first. I've already started up the server, and essentially we want a protected route, which is going to be this page right here, the dashboard, without using next-auth, because that would be like an overkill for this use case. So let me show you what we're going to build. Essentially, this is going to be the login screen. And then we also have the dashboard, which I'm going to navigate to. The URL might be a bit small, but I'm navigating to the dashboard. And as you can see, didn't work. Why didn't that work? After all, we don't have any server-side rendering here in the dashboard, right? We aren't checking if the user is logged in. There is no session. Like this has nothing to do with the session. This is just to demonstrate you that there are some actions in the dashboard that also need to be authenticated. So how are we doing this exactly? And the answer is with middleware. And in this middleware, we're using some really cool code that allows us to verify the integrity of the legitimacy of a JSON Web Token in middleware instead of having to do it on the server. Because normally when you use things like import, verify from JSON Web Token and then try to use that in here. So let's say, verify token, for instance, and that didn't even work because we also need to pass the process.env. What did I call it? A JWT secret key, I believe. And let's just assume that exists, and that exists as well. Let's try verifying that by going to the... Yeah, okay, there we go. You get the error. The Edge runtime does not support Node.js buffer module. So essentially, that means you can't use JSON Web Token in the middleware. And the answer then is, and the question then is, well, how do we handle authentication in NextJS middleware to protect our routes? So before users can even enter the protected route, and they get redirected to the login. But when we log in, so let's say admin@email.com, and then the password, which is just admin, and then sign in. We're not going to save that. Then we are in the arguably not so pretty dashboard. And even if we try to go back to the login, it won't let us. It will redirect us to the dashboard until the JWT that we've stored in the cookies right here, as you can see, user token, which is a JWT, a JSON Web Token, has expired. It will expire very fast. In my case, that's going to be 1 minute because that's what I set it to. Right here, as you can see, set expiration time 1 minute. I know this is a lot of code, and that's why I'm going to move this whole thing to the left, and we're going to build this together right now from the ground up. And it's not going to be hard, but really, really useful for your applications. Okay, and before we do that, I think 1 minute might have passed, so let me refresh this page. And yes, it worked perfectly. I wasn't sure if 1 minute had actually passed, but it did. And whenever we refresh the page after our JSON Web Token has expired, we automatically get signed out and then redirected to the login, because the token that we have saved in our cookies, right here, this user token, it still exists in the cookies, but it is invalid. So we invalidated the token and we are forced to sign in again. And for example, whenever you click remember me, you could dynamically increase the expiration date of the JWT from like 1 minute that we currently have it to, 1 month or something like that. Okay, let's close that though. We won't need Chrome for now. And And let's get started. So to get started, we're gonna have the CMD open, go to our desktop, and then initialize a new project. Should we do it with tRPC? Because in this project right here, I did it with tRPC, which is an abstraction for your API routes. So it looks like this in the end. And I think we will. The only difference really is that we are setting the header here. But setting cookies is even easier in normal Next.js. So let's do this with tRPC. You can follow along just fine in regular Next.js. Works really well in both cases. So npx, let's create a T3 app at latest. So we're using tRPC version 10. If you want to follow along in regular Next.js, this would be npx create next app at latest. If you want to follow along in Next.js 13. Or the different one if you want to follow along in the stable version 12. Let's call the app JWT. We are going to be working in TypeScript. Now we're not going to use auth because the way the authentication worked in the app I've just showed you is not through next-auth. It is very, very simple because we only want an admin login. We have an email address and a password saved in our .env file. And then whenever we're sending this data to the server, as you can see here in the code for that, we are just simply checking, we're getting the email and the password that we sent to the API route, and then we're literally just checking, do they match? Does the email match whatever is inside of the .env, and also the same for the password? And if they do, then we are executing the logic, and if they don't, then we are throwing an error from this API route. So this is a very simple admin login that is not meant for users to sign themselves up. That is the purpose I'm using JWTs for. Otherwise, I just use next-auth. Okay, let us execute this. So do we need Tailwind? Yes, for some very basic styling. Then we want tRPC. And we are not going to be interacting with a database. So let's leave out Prisma. No, we don't want to Git repo. We can do that later if I'm gonna push this up to GitHub for you to follow along. And no, we're not gonna run npm install because we're gonna use yarn instead. Okay, so let's open this up in VS Code. Install all the necessary dependencies by running yarn. And then let's see, where do we get started? I think the first thing that we probably want is let's go into the dashboard here. Let's make a route that is called dashboard that we want to protect with the middleware. I think that's the easiest start. So let's create the route we want to protect first. It's going to be under pages, and let's just call it dashboard as well. Just keep the naming according to the other project. And whenever VS Code has done loading, which might take a bit sometimes. If you didn't know, by the way, VS Code is built with Electron, so it is a JavaScript application as far as I know. So it can be a little bit slow sometimes. You can delete the prettier config. There we go. Okay, this is going to be the route we are going to protect, the dashboard route. Now, how are we going to do this? Well, if we take a look at this middleware right here, the first thing we want to do is, initialize the middleware. Before we think of any logic, let's initialize the middleware in Next.js. The way you do that in the current versions is by initializing a file called middleware.ts at the same level as your pages directory. That's how you do it. And from here, we're going to export an asynchronous function as called middleware, which is going to receive a rec. And since we're working in TypeScript, we're going to type this out as a next request. There we go. And then in this function, we can handle all the middleware logic that we want to handle. Before we do that though, we want to also export a constant that is called, I believe it's config. Yes, it's config. And in here, we want to define when this middleware should run. Now there are two approaches. We could also get the URL and then say something like, if url.pathname.starts with and so on, you could do that, or you could export this config, and then in here we'll have a matcher. That matcher is either going to take one string or a string array, and in our case that's going to be dashboard. You could protect an API route if you want. I usually do this through tRPC, but just to show you how this would look like, you'd have something like this. So the middleware, oops, hold up, this looks kind of weird. Did I do something wrong? There should be a quote. Oh, that shouldn't be there. There we go. This right here is how you'd protect an API route, because the middleware would also run whenever this file path is navigated to. In our case, we're not going to worry about that. And we also want the /login. So this middleware that we're going to write right here is going to run whenever we go to the dashboard or the login. And let me disable GitHub Copilot for this. We won't need that. Okay. And then here we can now see if the user has a token. So const token is going to be equal to rec. And on the request, we got the cookies, and we can say .get. Let's get a cookie. This is up to you how you call it, but be sure to make it consistent across your whole application. I usually call this user a token. You could call this anything that you want, and then we want the value of that that either exists or doesn't. So either the token is a string or it is undefined. Now, how do we verify the token on the edge, right? Because this middleware is running on the edge. And that's the difficulty. We can't just use JSON Web Token, but instead we have to do something different. And we will do that. So let's say const verified token is going to be equal to, let's assume the token exists. And now we want to do some logic, right? Because we're not sure if it exists, but now we can be. And then we're going to say await verify auth. Now the verify auth is a function that we are going to create in a second here, and we're going to pass the token. Now, if that fails for some reason, we're going to have a catch. We're going to catch the error, and then we're going to just console.log the error out. All right, that works just fine. However, the verify auth doesn't exist yet. So what I think we should do, and how I did it right here in the original project, let's look into the file structure. It's done in a lib and then the auth.ts. So let's just copy that structure. I think it's pretty good. Let's just name it lib. And by the way, this whole thing is following best practices, because some of the code, especially in the auth.ts that we're going to write here, is coming from Vercel, the official Vercel suggestions on how you could do this that I'm following here. Okay, so in here, let's export the constant of verify auth, the function that we've invoked or tried to invoke in our middleware right here. And let's see what we're going to do in that. It's going to be an async function, an arrow function. There we go. That's going to receive the token that we're passing as the first argument, that we're receiving as the first parameter here. And then here, we're going to have a try catch, because we want to do some asynchronous magic in here, which is going to be const verified, which is going to be our verified token. It's going to be await JWT verify. Then we're going to pass the token. However, this JWT verify doesn't exist yet. Now, where is that coming from? And the answer is from an npm package called Joes, because this works on the edge. We are going to import two things from this package. It's a pretty famous package, by the way, which are going to be, let's see, import JWT verify and also sign JWT. We're going to import that for later from Joes. Now, Joes, we haven't installed that yet, so yarn add Joes, not as a dev dependency, but as a real dependency, because we'd also need that in production. There we go. And this expects more than the token. We can see, the key, there are some options. So what exactly are we going to pass in here? Well, let's pass a new text encoder. So this is a class, and we're making a new instance of it, invoking that, and then dots encode. And then here we're going to say get JWT secret key and also invoke that. Now the JWT secret key is something we are also going to create. So export const get JWT secret key, which is going to be an arrow function. There we go. Now the secret that we can save into a const is going to be process.env. And now whatever you want to call it, pretty much, it doesn't matter. So this is totally up to you. In my case, I just decided to name it JWT underscore secret underscore key. And that's it. Okay, so if the secret doesn't exist, so if it wasn't specified, or if it's secret.length, if it's 0 characters long, then we're gonna throw a new error, and then here we're just gonna say, I'm just gonna copy this over from here. Doesn't really matter what you say. The environment variable JWT secret key is not set is pretty verbose, so you could say something like that. And if it does exist, then we're gonna return it. There we go. Okay, so how do we want to catch the error? Well, we're just gonna throw a new error and say, oops, and just say, your token has expired. And that's all we need to say in the catch. Now, whenever we invoke this function, we also want access to the payload data potentially, right? So how do we get that? Well, we can return the verified dot, you can see protected header or payload. We want to pass the payload, and we're gonna type this out as user JWT payload. Now this is again totally up to you how you name this. We're gonna create an interface for that. If you're working in TypeScript, if you're working in JavaScript, it does not matter, like that. And then this is just gonna be a JTI, which is gonna be a string, and then the IAT, which stands for issued at, which is, nope, that's gonna be a number. All right, there we go. So returning the payload, and whenever we call verify auth, and we also need to import that, then we are getting the payload or an error. Okay, and that allows us to now move on in our middleware and get some more logic written out here. Okay, so what do we want to happen exactly, right? So whenever the user navigates to the login page and there is no token, that should be totally fine, right? We shouldn't have an issue with that. So if the rec.url.path, nope, that's next URL dot path name dot starts with, and this is gonna be, you know, login or whatever you named your login page. And if there's no verified token, then we're literally just gonna return. Nothing should happen, right? This is a totally perfectly fine scenario. And otherwise, we're gonna do something else. So let's say const URL is equal to request.url, and below here, if there is no verified token, like that, then some stuff is going to happen. Now, what's going to happen? Well, in here you could handle the API authorization like this, for example. You'd also have to import the next response. Doesn't really matter because we're not going to worry about it, but this is where your API authorization would go. Now, if there is no verified token, then we're just going to return a next response that we get from next server.redirect. And where are we going to redirect to? To a new URL, which is going to be /login. And then we're going to pass the request.url as the second parameter. Well, we could also just pass this URL. Doesn't really matter. All right. And I think when we compare it to the code in my project right here, we should be pretty set. However, if the user has a token and is trying to navigate to the login page for whatever reason, we don't want that to happen, right? So if the URL, or we could say rec.url, what did I import here? URL from inspector, whatever the hell that might be. If the request.url includes /login, and if there is a verified token, you know, for whatever reason, we don't know, we don't want that to happen, right? We want to return a next response dot redirect. And where do we want to redirect it? To a new URL that is /dashboard. At least that's what I call it. So this should match your page's name that you want, want to protect, or that you want to redirect to if the user is already logged in, I should rather say, and then rec.url as the second parameter. Okay, let's try starting this up, and I'm gonna pause the other server for that. So let's go in here, say yarn dev, and let's see what happens. So let's go to localhost. All right, that's the standard boilerplate. Let's go to dashboard. And okay, so dashboard, even though it doesn't exist, we're gonna get redirected to login, which also doesn't exist, but the route protection worked. So that's great. We're gonna have the login component. Now this is gonna be, actually I don't have to make this ugly. I think I will though, so it's easier for you to follow along, because I could just copy over the whole login component from here, which has a lot of styling attached to it because it comes from Tailwind UI. I'm not gonna do this for you, so you can follow along easier, but it's gonna be way more ugly as well. Let's just keep the bare bones login. Okay, for the login, we're gonna create a state, right? So let's call this, let's just call this input, set input. Now we're not gonna type this out because this is gonna be inferred, which is gonna be really handy. And then, you know, what do we want as the input? An email like that, and a password like that. And we also need to import useState from React. Okay, then we also want a const handle change, so we don't really have to worry about which state we're gonna update. So let's have the event in here that we're gonna get passed, and this is gonna be a change event of an HTML input element. We also need to import this type. There we go. So in here we can say, we can destructure the name and the value from the event dot targets. That's what we're destructuring from. And then setting the input to whatever it was previously, but the, so we're gonna spread in whatever it was previously and then dynamically insert the name, which is gonna have the value. And this is not seeming to work. What did I mess up? Oh, I forgot one dot. Okay, there we go. So we're spreading in whatever it was previously, and then the name is gonna be the value. So either this is email or password, and then the value is gonna be whatever the user typed in. So this is best practice if you have one state that is an object, so you don't need to do that in your code. Okay, so that allows us to do the following. In the input, we can just say value is gonna be input.email. And then on change for both is gonna be really convenient because it's just gonna be the exact same thing called handle change because we're handling all the logic in the handle change. And the second input is gonna be of value input.password. And then the on change is gonna be the exact same thing. There we go. And that's a placeholder, so we know which is what. So this is gonna be password. And the first one is gonna be email. Okay, there we go. And then we also want a button. Last thing that we want is a button to sign in. And this is going to be pretty simple. This is going to be of type button and sign in. There we go. Let's take a look at how this looks. So login. Okay, looks pretty bad, but it gets the job done. Now let's worry about the, well, not really worry, but let's work on the login, logic. So how do we go about that? Well, depending on whether you're following along in the T3 stack, so with tRPC or without in regular Next.js, the next steps will differ just a tiny bit because I'm gonna do this in the server and then router, and then we're gonna create, like an auth.ts, the auth route. In your case, this would be a Next.js normal API route if you're following along in Next.js. Okay, export const auth router, which is going to be the router that we get from /tRPC. And then here we can do a lot of cool stuff. How do we want to call this? Well, let's call this login because that's what it is, which is going to be a public procedure. This just means if you're not familiar with tRPC, that everybody can do this. You don't need to be authenticated to do this, which makes sense because when someone is trying to log in, they are not authenticated. Okay, so in here we're gonna say .mutation. No, first we're gonna say .input because we are expecting multiple values, so the password on the email. So to validate that, we're gonna import z from zod. This is for type validation or just input validation generally. We can say z.object. However, if you're following along in Next.js, this would just be the equivalent of a POST request passing the email and the password from your front end to the back end and you receiving that data on the back end. Just make sure that it's really the stuff you're expecting, right? Never trust user input. You want to make sure it's actually a string as the password and the email That's pretty much all I'm doing here with Zod. Okay, so email is gonna be az.string, and conveniently, Zod also allows the .email, and then the password is gonna be az.string. So it's gonna throw an error whenever this does not match, and then the actual logic for this API route we're gonna handle back here, where we receive the input as the first argument. There we go, we can destructure that immediately. And then let's see what should happen right here in the login. Actually, before we do that though, let's save that. Let's have we can remove this. The auth is gonna be auth router. That's the only thing we need. And then remove this from the main index page. We won't need that anymore. That was just kind of for the boilerplate setup. In fact, we can just, oops. Oh, my VS Code seems to be lagging again, but we can just remove all of the stuff off the index page. We won't need that at all. And as I said earlier, you know, VS Code is built with Electron, as far as I know, so sometimes it's a tad slow, but you get used to it really. So did it? No, it still didn't load. Okay, let's just give it a second, and I'll be right back here when it finished loading. Okay, hallelujah, I think it finally finished loading. There we go. Remove that, then we have the auth router. We can remove this and the example router. We won't need those. Okay, is that gonna throw an error? Nope, doesn't seem like it. All right, now whenever we're trying to log in, which is gonna be, where did I do that? Wait, login, here we are. Whenever we're trying to log in, we want to pass this data to the API route. To do that with tRPC, we're gonna say tRPC.auth.login.useMutation. Because, you know, why the use mutation? Well, because we defined it as a mutation right here, and then it expects the input whenever we call this function. And we call that function with the mutate. This is a given name by tRPC, but you could rename this whatever you want, something like login. And then whenever we click the button, right, we're gonna have an on click that says login. Now, what are we gonna pass for the login? Well, well, how did I do that here? Let me see. Which is gonna be the input. All right, because the input already has the email and password, we can literally just pass the input, and that will then be passed to this API route right here. If you're working in regular Next.js, just make a post request with the state that we're saving this into, this one, and pass that to the API route, validate maybe that it's a string, and then in the mutation, we're working on the actual logic of this API route. Okay, so essentially, we want to just check this input against some things we are going to define in our environment variable. So let's call it, you know, admin underscore email. It's going to be admin@email.com, and admin underscore password is going to be admin. Okay, my camera battery almost ran out, so I had to charge it. So you might have noticed the background changed a bit, but don't worry, we're gonna continue right where we left off. Okay, so env and login, we got that done. These are our admin credentials, and now we want to go to the router and check if they match, right? So let me pull this up. So first things first, let's destructure. So we want to get the values from the input, right? So what has the user put in as the email and what has the user put in as a password? And we're going to get these two values right here. Now, because we have these values in the .env, we are not going to worry about encryption at all. Whereas if you kept actual user data in a database, you should never keep the password as a string. You should always hash it, encrypt it with something like bcrypt, and then only compare the hashes and never have it as actual text in the database. Okay, but since we don't need to worry about that, let's just continue on. So if the email is equal to the process.env. And what did we call it again? I think admin email. Yes, let's just copy this, paste it here. And the password that the user has input is equal to the process.env.admin password. Let's just copy and paste that. Then the user is logged in successfully. And then we can handle the logic accordingly. However, if the user doesn't log in, so if the credentials are wrong, then let's throw a new tRPC error. Really convenient way to throw errors. Let's have the code as unauthorized. And then let's also include a message, which we're not going to worry about too much on the front end, but let's just say invalid email or password. Because we're going to show the same error no matter what happens if there's an error on the front end anyways. Doesn't matter too much, but just for best practice here on the backend. Okay, so what if the user is logged in successfully? Let's just log it out. Successfully. Let's go to our route and see if it works. So the server should still be up. Yes, it is. All right. So email, let's enter something. Oh, wait, we can't even, hold up. The input doesn't work yet. So let me go to login. Why could that be? Oh, okay. And 5 minutes of debugging later, I noticed this doesn't work. Oh, I removed the placeholders, by the way, in my debugging attempts. Placeholder email, placeholder, hold up. Password. This is gonna be type password. Okay, this should be better. Email password, yes. Okay, and we can't type in here because if you do this with a handle change, remember that you need to set the name on the input inputs. So this needs to match whatever is right here. So this is going to be password, this is going to be email, because that is how we differentiate between the different types of inputs right here in the name. So make sure we have that, and then we can actually type this out properly and click sign in. Okay, and as we can see here, we tried to sign in. We received an error because in the router, we are assuming this is an email. However, what we passed in here, ASD, is not a valid email, so we get that as an error. And if we want, we could throw this as an error on the front end. This would be good for this would be good for user experience. So we could say, you know, a P, invalid login data, is gonna be text red 500 and text small. That is how I usually have my errors, and then, you know, is error and we have that. All right, so if we input something wrong, then it says invalid login data. However, if you put in the real stuff, so admin@email.com and also admin and try sign in, we also get the error. Okay, how about we change this back to text for a second, just so we can see what we're typing. There we go. And then also let's go to the router and see what we are doing wrong, because that should kind of work, right? Okay, we don't get any errors in here. We do get the error of your token has expired. Okay, first let's log out the email password on the server, so to make sure we are getting them. And then let's log out the same thing, but for the environment variables. env email and env password, which are gonna be process.env.admin password and process.env.admin email. And let's see what the issue is. So let's go back. Let's try ASD sign in. Let's see what the console says. Validation email. Okay, this is not a valid email. So admin@email.com. Admin. Click sign in. Okay, we still get the error. However, email password admin@email.com. admin@email. Okay, so logged in successfully. It does happen, but we are forgetting a return statement in here. That was the problem. Okay, so the login does work. We can remove all the console logs. We just need to return here, so this doesn't get executed. Okay, and with that said, the user is logged in successfully. So what do we want to happen? Essentially, when the user has logged in successfully, we want to forward them to the dashboard, right? And we're going to do that right here on the front end, in the login, right here. So in the user mutation, we get an onSuccess handler that we can just invoke like this. And then we also need access to the NextJS router. So use router. There we go. Get that from NextJS. And then we're going to say router.push, and that is going to be /dashboard. So essentially, we're navigating the user to the dashboard. Okay, let's try this out. So admin@email.com and then admin as the password, sign in. It says invalid login data again. Hold up. Oh, maybe because we didn't save this, right? Let's try that. admin@email.com and then admin and sign in. Let's see what happens. Okay, so it did come back successfully. However, we did not get forwarded to the dashboard. So how about we try going to the, man, this is such a mess. I need to close some tabs. What can we don't need that right now. We don't need that right now. We don't need that right now. Okay, so let's just return the success of true. Let's see if that changes anything. Let's type in admin@email.com and then admin, sign in. Okay, and the mutation did come back successfully, but the onSuccess handler did not seem to work yet. And that is probably because, I mean, that's exactly what we want to happen, right? The user should get forward to the dashboard, but before we access the dashboard, the middleware is going to check, does this user have a valid token or not? And obviously, because we've never set the token, nope, that's not what I wanted to do. Where storage, there we are, cookies, because the user has never, been set with the token. Dude, I swear on Firefox, this is really ugly. Never mind. Because we've never set the token from the backend on login, the token is expired. So this token, there is one, but as we can see here, token has expired, it's invalid, and that's why we cannot forward the user to the dashboard right here. So what do we need to do to fix that? Well, we need to implement the JWT signage from the server. So whenever we logged in successfully right here, then we want to return a cookie, a JWT cookie to the user that we can then use so the user is authenticated, right? And we're going to do that. So const token, the token we're going to pass back is going to be await new, and then sign JWT and invoke that with an empty object. Now we need to also mark this mutation as asynchronous. There we go. And then the sign WT is going to come from Joe's. There we go. Okay, and then in here we can chain a bit of stuff. That is going to be set protected header. And then the algorithm we're going to use is going to be H6256. There we go. Then the set JTI, that one, is going to be nano ID. So our token has a nano ID. However, that is, oops, let me reset my keyboard here to German. And there we go. Okay. Stop the server and then yarn at nano ID that we're just going to use for the JWT. It's a really, really lightweight and small package. And I think that is a named import that we're going to do from nano ID. There we go. We can just invoke that, and let's put these below. No, still doesn't work with my prettier. Okay, that's fine. And set issued at with an empty invocation, because that's going to be default, right now. And set expiration time, which is going to be 1 minute, just for demonstration purposes. Now we can format this properly. And then, well, by the way, this you can set this to whatever you want. This works with Vercel/ms under the hood. So you can actually type in strings like 1 minute or 1s for 1 second, for instance, and Vercel/ms under the hood will turn that into milliseconds. So 10h would be, 10 hours, 2.5 HRS also works, so it's very convenient for converting strings into milliseconds. And then arguably the most important step, we're going to sign this JSON Web Token. Now, what are we going to sign it with? Well, that depends on your secret. Essentially, when I go to my env right here, we want to define a JWT, let's just call it JWT, and then the JWT secret key. How are we going to call that? Well, essentially, the secret key can be whatever you want. This could be hello, but that would be a really unsecure JWT secret key. So, just type some random stuff on your keyboard. Make sure it's base 64 compatible though. So only use letters, upper and lowercase in numbers. And that's going to be our JWT secret key that we're going to use to sign, and also to verify the integrity of a JSON Web Token. Okay, so we're going to sign this with a new text encoder. We're going to invoke that, and then .encode, what we've done previously, with the invocation, and then get JWT secret key, and invoke that. So we're signing this with our JWT secret key. And now that we've got the token all set, we can set this or send this to the user. To do that, we're going to add a package called cookie. Now that is an insanely popular package, cookie. Let me show you, it got like 17 million downloads, 22.2 million downloads in the last 7 days, which is absolutely crazy. We're going to use that. And now we can actually work on passing this token back to the user. So how are we going to do that? Well, we can say res. Well, we don't have access to that yet. So in tRPC, this takes more effort than in regular Next.js. In regular Next.js, you just have access to the response object in the API route by default. However, in tRPC, it's a bit different. We want to do that in here. So let me see how I did that. It's in the create context, and then we can destructure the request and the response from the options. And then pass that as the context, reg res, there we go. And that does not seem to work, so let's just remove this and then return an object with reg and res. Okay, now we can get access to the request and the response by also destructuring the context up here and then saying const res is equal to context. We won't need the request right here, just the response. And then for the response, we can say res.setHeader. Essentially, we just want to send back the cookie. It's probably easier in regular Next.js than tRPC. So this is where regular Next.js really shines, but it works just fine in tRPC as well. So set cookie as the header, and then cookie.serialize. We don't even have cookie yet. We're going to import cookie. That is a default export from cookie. So we're going to receive it right here without a destructuring from cookie. And we also need the types, so let's install those really quick. Yarn add the types, and then add those as a def dependency, because we won't need those for production. You know, we don't need types for production. And then we're going to invoke this cookie.serialize. Okay, now the serialize is going to take the name as the first argument. Remember, no, that's okay. I thought about the word name, but I want to type the word token. Okay, remember, this should be consistent with whatever you call the cookie across your application. Then we're going to pass the token as the second argument, and then some specifications. So for example, we can set, a lot of attributes. We want the HTTP only to be true. We want the path to be a /, and then also we want the secure property if the process.env.nodeEnv is equal to production. So in production, yes, we want the secure setting on the cookie. In development, no, we don't. Great. So let's save that. And I think that is pretty much all we need to do. Let's go back to this page. I think the server stopped, by the way. So yarn dev. Let's restart the server really quick. Go back here and give this a hot minute to load. There we go. It's loaded. And then type in admin@email.com. Then admin. And click sign in. Yes, really nice. Okay, so we did get forwarded to the dashboard. And if we look into our storage, then cookies, we can see the user token right here. And it's been created, today. Then we've got the value of it. And I swear this looks so horrible in Firefox. Why don't we switch over to Chrome right now? Let me close some of these. The JSON Web Token on NPM, we won't need that. Let's just have this window open. And yeah, it's just way easier on Chrome. So let's go into admin@email.com, type in admin, click sign in. We're getting forward to the dashboard. And then let's see into our application. So we've got the user token right here, which is this token. And if you didn't know or have never worked with JSON Web Tokens, we can go to JWT.io. We can literally paste the code in here and then see what it looks like and which information it holds. So we can see the, what did I do? We can see the algorithm, which we used to sign it, which is this one right here that we've used. We can see, the a JWT ID, which we've used nano ID for, then the IAT, which is the issued at, and then the expiry, which interestingly enough, you can see it's exactly 60 units after this. So 60 seconds, because we set the expiry, remember, to 1 minute. So it's gonna expire in 1 minute. So we can refresh this page right now. That works just fine. However, if we wait above 1 minute and refresh the page again, then whenever we refresh the page, remember this middleware is running and checking, is your token still valid? So as soon as it's invalid, and that just matched the timing perfectly, then we get redirected to the login because our JWT has expired. Even though it's still there, as you can see, it has expired. So we need to log in again. And if we enter wrong credentials, doesn't work. But if we enter right credentials, then we'll also get forwarded to the dashboard. And we can access this for 1 minute, do everything for 1 minute, and then we will be signed out automatically. Really, really cool. Okay, now how about we go into Firefox, because we should be signed out here, and try one last thing. That is going to the dashboard without being logged in, which I've showed you previously. As you can see, doesn't work. We get instantly redirected to the main login. All right. That's pretty much all I want to show you. I think this is really, really cool, being able to handle all this JWT stuff on the edge. Makes it really fast, really accessible, and it's quite simple. That's all I want to show you. I wish you a lot of fun building cool stuff with this, handling secure authentication and authorization for your users. That's all I want to share. Thank you very much for watching. I'll see you in the next one. Have a good one, and bye-bye.